Hi, everyone. Meteorologist Amy Sweezey here with Florida Weather Authority. It is August 13th. Do you know what that day is? Yeah, if you were in Central Florida or anywhere in the state of Florida in 2004, you probably remember August 13th as the day that Hurricane Charley made landfall. We're going to take a little look back on Charley, see some of the highlights from that big hurricane, also talk about some of the challenges, some of the lessons learned, some of the controversies, and even, if you can believe it or not, some of the fun things that came after that storm. And it was quite a season in 2004. We not only had Charley, we actually had four big hurricanes that hit the state of Florida. So let's get right to it. First of all, Charley. This is the satellite image, and this is the radar image of landfall. Charley made landfall as a Category 4 in Port Charlotte, which is just south of Tampa. Now, the thing is, Charley was kind of a small storm as far as size goes. It was very compact. It operated more like a large tornado than a hurricane, but it packed a powerful punch. It moved across the state quickly. In only 12 hours, it went from the west coast to the east coast, exiting near Daytona Beach. The other thing about Charley is that it intensified so very quickly. In 3 hours, that's it, just 3 hours, it went from a Category 2 to a Category 4 storm, and that happened right before making landfall. Now, before Charley, the years of 2000 to 2004, those 5 years were really quiet across the state of Florida. We had Gordon, Helene in 2000, Barry and Gabrielle in 2001, Edouard in 2002, Henri in 2003, and then Bonnie was in 2004, right before Charley. All of those were tropical storms or even depressions at landfall. They were not hurricanes. So it had been pretty quiet up to this point. And so that's why it took a lot of us, not really by surprise, but I think it was a rude awakening, if you will. And of course, little did we know that there were going to be more storms on the heels of Charley. So I had been in Central Florida for a couple of years at that point. I was forecasting for the NBC TV station in Orlando at the time. And this is me. Yes, I was 8 months pregnant. I was due in September of 2004 with my very first child. And so I was a little stressed out. A lot of people were concerned that I might go into labor. In fact, I wasn't the only pregnant meteorologist at the NBC station at the time. I also had a coworker who was also pregnant and also due in September with our very first children. So we both were working nonstop. Meteorologist Tom Sorrells, who was also part of the Florida Weather Authority team here, he was working at the CBS station in Orlando. He was on the air as Charley made landfall, and not only made landfall, but then beelined it straight across Orlando and then out Daytona Beach. Rob Eicher, meteorologist, who is now Dr. Rob Eicher, he was brand new to Central Florida. In fact, he started working at what is now the Spectrum station, but at the time it was owned by a different company, but the 24-hour cable station, Channel 13, he started working there in August of 2004. So he really kind of got thrown into it, and his feet were put to the fire, I guess you could say. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions when you hear people talk about Charley and the season of 2004 is you'll hear them say that Charley made a hard right turn and the National Hurricane Center missed it. Their forecast was wrong. Well, there's a couple of things to unpack about that statement. First of all, hurricanes don't really make hard right turns. Do they wobble? Yes. Do they turn and curve? Absolutely. But they don't really make hard right turns. They're giant masses of water and wind. And so it's kind of a slow thing that happens. Now, relatively speaking, over the course of a few hours, yes, we did see Charley turn to the right before it made landfall, which was problematic for people who lived in Tampa, because the forecast was that the storm was going to go to Tampa. So a lot of people in Tampa actually moved inland and came over to Orlando in the inland areas because they thought they would be more safe there. This is the path, the close-up view of the cone, the official forecast cone from the Hurricane Center. And the thing about the cone is that it shows the forecast path of the center of the storm. So all of the white area that you see here, that is the center of where the storm center is expected to be. Does that make sense? So in other words, you can't just say that the storm is going to follow this black line and that's the only place where impacts will be felt inside this white area. Notice the red line on the map here. That's the hurricane warning. So the entire coast of the peninsula, the west side of the state, including the Keys and portions of Cuba, were under hurricane warnings. But the problem came in that a lot of people, a lot of meteorologists, a lot of people who didn't communicate well that the black line is simply the center of the cone. And I put myself in that too, because I was here at the time. So could I have done a better job of explaining that, hey, don't focus on the skinny black line in the middle. That's not necessarily the only place where we're going to feel the storm. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's where the center will be. The center of the storm could be anywhere inside this white cone. And of course, that is where it did end up making landfall, to the right of where that black circle H is. It was over here, closer to Port Charlotte and Punta Gorda, as opposed to up into Tampa. I think the whole point of that and the whole lesson that we need to take away from that is just, what can we learn? And the biggest thing that was learned is we need to get rid of that center black line. And now you'll notice that the Hurricane Center does not put that black line in the middle, and neither do most of the TV stations either. So I think that has been helpful, but it wasn't a lesson that we knew at the time, unfortunately. So yes, Charley did make landfall here near Port Charlotte, Punta Gorda. There's Fort Myers. Up here is Tampa. So instead of the storm going to Tampa and then moving up the center of the state toward Tallahassee and up into Georgia, it made landfall farther south. There was a front, a trough that kind of pushed it to the south. And so instead, the main energy from Charley went right across downtown Orlando, Polk County, Orange County, right across Seminole, up through Volusia, and then exited near Daytona Beach. But it was still a hurricane at Daytona Beach. It still was a Category 1 hurricane by the time it got there. So the 11 a.m. update coming out from the National Hurricane Center, the cone is pretty much unchanged from that 5 a.m. update that I just showed you earlier. Now, keep in mind, Charley made landfall at 5 p.m. So this is only about 6 hours before the storm is making landfall. At 11 a.m. and noon, I'm on TV with Leslie Hudson, who's the other meteorologist who was pregnant at the time. And the way TV stations usually do it, I mean, everybody does it different, but the way we used to do it is we would split things up in order to do team coverage of a storm. So during a hurricane, when it's early on, we might have one person focus on the big picture. Here's the cone, here's the path, here's the latest stats, here's what we expect, like big picture. And then the other person will focus on the more specific details, like, okay, county by county, what's each county going to feel, what kind of wind, what kind of rain. So we'd kind of split it up that way. Once the hurricane got a little closer, we might split it up where one person would talk about the wind and the other person would talk about the rain. So one person would show the gusts and all of the wind products, and the other person would focus on the flooding and the rain amounts and the rain totals and where's the rain right now and the rain bands and all of that. So we would kind of split it up in different ways. What Leslie and I were doing is I was doing big picture. So I went on TV at 11 a.m. and showed this cone, this current path from the Hurricane Center, still taking the center of the storm, a little bit farther to the north near Tampa. Again, Port Charlotte was still in the cone, but it was to the right of that black line. Leslie Hudson was on TV with me, meteorologist, and she's showing the radar and she's showing the satellite and showing that the center seems to be sort of shifting to the right a little bit. So she starts kind of talking about that. Now, I assumed that all of the other TV stations were doing the same thing. I wasn't watching them because I was busy at work. So I don't know what everybody else said and did at the time, but I just know what we did. And that's what we were doing, was saying, hey, this does look like it's shifting. It's going to the right. But the official forecast from the Hurricane Center, still everybody was thinking it was going to Tampa. In the meantime, the storm is getting stronger and it is intensifying. And so we are just monitoring it and knowing that this storm is going to impact the entire state of Florida in some way. So the next update comes in at 2 p.m. Now, at this point, the storm is only a few hours from landfall, and we're already getting those huge outer rain bands there along the Gulf Coast. But now notice the cone has shifted a little bit now, showing it farther south, and now rolling right across Orlando and closer to Daytona Beach. So now the forecast path kind of shifts a little bit more. Again, still the entire coast is in the hurricane warning. So this was the path at 2 p.m. And then the storm, of course, made landfall at 5 p.m. and then rolled across the state very quickly. In fact, it was in Orlando around 8, 9 o'clock that night. It was late. It was dark. It was scary because the wind was so loud. We hadn't experienced anything like this in a very long time. And then it exited Daytona Beach around 11 o'clock midnight. So really quick window of time there of about 12 hours. Our state's only 300 miles across or so. Well, depending on where you are. And so it doesn't take long for a quickly moving storm to move across. This is the actual track of what Hurricane Charley did. Again, making landfall, moving across the state and moving through. This is a closer view. The forecast path on Thursday. Now, the storm made landfall Friday the 13th. So this was the Thursday forecast from the Hurricane Center. Again, taking the center of the storm, the skinny black line to Tampa, but this whole area was in the cone. The red line is Charley's actual path. And notice how just those few miles between Tampa and Port Charlotte can make a world of difference as far as where the tornadoes set up, where the biggest winds are felt, and of course, even with the rain and the what we call the dirty side of the storm, where you have the most tornadoes, that shifts a little bit too, and you start getting different locations with different kinds of wind and rain. So on this graphic, there's two different things here. The first one with the reds and the blues, this is the wind path or the wind swath, where the winds were. So look at the pink and the red. Those are all of the 100 up to 150 mile per hour winds. That's a big area that felt at least 100 mile per hour winds where it made landfall and then stretching all the way up into Polk and Osceola counties. Now the map on the right changes colors a little bit, but it still shows kind of the same information here for Orange County and Seminole County, where you see the oranges and the sort of pink colors. We're still getting hurricane force winds right across Seminole County, up into Volusia, right along I-4. And then even over here in Daytona Beach, we still had an 80 mile per hour wind gust reported. That's a Category 1 hurricane. So making landfall as a 4 over here near Punta Gorda and Port Charlotte, going right across the state, right up through Orlando and Seminole County, and then exiting Volusia and Flagler counties. So that was a lot of devastation and a lot of places that were dealing with these hurricane force winds. And that's why we had so much damage in so many locations. This is one photo that's just absolutely tragic, showing the complete and utter devastation at landfall. Look at all these houses. I mean, these look like the pictures from when you see an F5 tornado out west, where these houses are just completely demolished. And of course, they're right on the water. Another picture here. This was President Bush in Air Force One touring Punta Gorda after all of the, everything happened. And the sun is out, of course, and shining brightly for all of the cleanup. One of the things I thought was interesting, this picture was fascinating. This was a auto shop that was totaled in Port Charlotte. So all around it is the totaled auto shop, but this car is still up on a lift. Incredible. This is Osceola County. This is Kissimmee. This is St. Cloud. This is Lake Toho. Look at all the trees that are just uprooted and laying on their side. Roofs that were damaged, buildings knocked down, so many trees everywhere, so many power outages too. A lot of power lines were down. People were without power for days after Hurricane Charley. Here's the blue tarps. When you were up in the air, either in a helicopter or an airplane, one of the things looking down you saw everywhere across, especially Central Florida, was the blue tarps. In fact, a lot of the stores were running out of blue tarps, and people were trying to cover their roofs with garbage bags and paint tarps and anything they could get their hands on to keep the water from coming in their roof because of the damage that was done. Here's another blue tarp for an example. On Colonial Drive in Orlando, the entire side of the building here, the facade completely ripped off. This Joanne Fabrics, that was another example of some of the damage. Here's other damage around Orange County in the Orlando area. Trees down, power lines down, trees on cars, trees on homes. Not a lot of flooding. We didn't have a lot of rain because Charley moved so quickly. This was really more of a windstorm and again, like a giant tornado. And it did kick up a lot of tornadoes in those outer rain bands too, in places that were nowhere even near the center of the storm. Here's some damage in Volusia County. Again, this is where Daytona Beach is located, Deltona, DeBary, signs on cars, trees on houses and cars, roof damage, traffic light knocked down. So it was a trying time. And the thing was that as everybody started getting out and able to clean up, and we finally had, a couple weeks break, at least if you were living here, immediately after Charley, we started talking about the next storm that was brewing, and that was Frances. Frances was on its way, and there were still huge piles of debris out by people's curbs because the city couldn't keep up. Nobody could keep up with cutting the trees and getting rid of the debris. And now we had Frances on its heels. And not only Frances, which did make landfall a couple weeks later over Labor Day weekend, on its heels, we had Ivan, which went to the Panhandle. And then we had Jean, which made landfall at the end of September. So in a 6 weeks time period, 3 storms crossed right over the same location in Polk County. Charley's the green line, Frances is the red line, Jean is the blue line. And I mean, look how skinny Florida is. And of course, as you know, when you look at this picture, these aren't just tiny little lines. That's the biggest lesson from this. You can't just follow that skinny little line or the center of that cone. You need to remember that the cone only represents where the center of the storm will be, but the storm is much bigger than that, much wider than that. And you can see that here on these pictures. So when we finally started to clean up a little bit, when Frances came, a lot of the piles that we had gathered of all of the debris and the trees got just knocked around again, and they were in neighbors' yards, and it was projectile, which was so scary. And then Ivan and Jean, same situation, where we finally had a chance to clean up a little bit after Frances, at least in Central Florida, because Ivan didn't impact South and Central Florida as much as it did the Panhandle. Ivan made landfall, Panama City Beach, Pensacola, those were the areas that were really impacted, destined by Ivan as it rolled to the north too. So once we were finally able to recover a little bit, and of course, I then had my baby at the end of September, I was laying in the hospital bed while Jean was making landfall. So I had worked up through the beginnings of Jean making its approach. And then while Jean was making landfall, I was in the hospital, but I was watching the plywood and the boards blow off the building that was under construction next door. So I was at Arnold Palmer Hospital in Orlando. Winnie Palmer Hospital was being built next door. That building, the stuff was just blowing like crazy, the projectiles, because yet again, we had a hurricane rolling through. So some crazy memories, but my daughter was born only a little bit early. She was healthy. And no, I did not name her Jean, because everybody does ask that. Here's some of the fun things from the storm that I did ask my teammates, Tom Sorrells and Rob Eicher, to send me some stuff. Tom received a whole bunch of t-shirts. We got a lot of gifts from people after this season because they were all watching us on TV or listening on the radio. A lot of you lost power for days on end. And by the way, if you did lose power, if you do have memories of Charley, we would love to have you share them in the comment section below, just because sometimes it's nice to just be able to reminisce and figure out what the lessons were that we learned and what we can do that will be better moving forward. So this was some shirts that Tom got, some survival shirts. I survived. I fought and survived 3 hurricanes. He still has them, by the way. Rob sent this one in. He's a Hurricane Charley storm chaser. This was what Channel 13 called themselves. They were storm chasers. That was their branding on August 13th, 2004. This is one of Tom's shirts over here on the right that has a comic on it. There's somebody inside the tub with a mattress over their head saying, "Wake me up on November 30th when hurricane season is over." Also, other viewers sent us these magnets. I don't know who you are, but thank you, whoever you were. IBeatTheHurricanes.com no longer exists, but that's my fridge on the left. That's Tom's air conditioner on the right. And we both still have those magnets after surviving the hurricanes altogether. So $7 billion in damage just from Charley. That did not include Frances, Ivan, and Jean. A lot of people were without power for days on end. If you lived here, again, we would love to have you share your comments with us in the comment section. So thank you. I know this video was long. I hope you enjoyed the little recap, but here's the deal. We live in Florida. We are in a hurricane prone area. So It's a good reminder to just be ready. Don't be scared, just prepare. And thank you for joining me here. I'm meteorologist Amy Sweezey, along with meteorologist Tom Sorrells, Dr. Rob Eicher. We are the Florida Weather Authority.